Welcome everyone to our next workshop. This one is Our Ancestors Were Scientists and We Are Too, Supporting Indigenous Youth to Protect Our Waters, which is a workshop I'm really excited about. I'm Darcy Evans. I'm a grad student at UC Santa Cruz. I'm a member of Quartz Valley Indian Reservation, and I work with Save California Salmon, and I'll be helping to moderate this panel today. We also have Pua and Regina helping. So if you're not looking for this event, you might want to go to the other Zoom link where there'll be more presentations happening. But if you've been here all day, thank you for sticking with us. And if you're just tuning in, welcome to the Advocacy and Water Protection in Native California Symposium. And right now we have what I think will be a great workshop. On our panel today, we have Angel Hinzo, who is a Ho-Chunk scholar and citizen of the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska. She is currently an assistant professor of ethnic studies on Kumeyaay land at the University of San Diego. We have Sophia Cisneros, who is a Coos scholar and citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians of Oregon. She is currently an assistant professor of physics and astronomy at the University of Denver. And we have Chris Nelson from Diné and the Laguna Pueblo tribes of the Southwest. Dr. Nelson is an assistant professor of higher education at the University of Denver with over 10 years of higher education experience. She has a cross-sectioning of experiences ranging from educational pathways in STEM, policy research, and student affairs. And I would just like to say it's been a great day, and it's great to see so many Indigenous scholars and activists here today. And so today, they'll be talking about their experiences in working with Native youth in the Denver area and bringing STEM education and Indigenous knowledges together. So again, I put a link to the Padlet in the chat, which looks like we can all engage with. And now I'll hand it over.
Thank you. We're happy to be here. Chris, can you share the presentation? Yay. All right. Thank you so much. It's very exciting to be here and being part of the Water Advocacy Symposium, and to kind of, for us to be able to share and talk about some of the work that we've been doing and are working on continuing to do. And so we do have a Padlet where for people who are watching on Facebook Live or at some point in the future, you can actually engage on there and add comments and questions and pictures of different things. And we also have some more information on some of the things that we'll be referring to if you want more information about them. But I'm Angel Hinzo. Next slide. Get to the. Okay. But I'm Angel Hinzo. We want to first acknowledge the land that we're on. In that, right now I'm in Colorado on Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute land, along with my colleague Chris, and Sophia is tuning in from New York on for all the people whose land that is up there, which include the Nunt'zi, Lenape, and Shinnecock, among other peoples. So we wanted to acknowledge the land on which where we're at right now, and the importance of that. We want to also acknowledge our ancestors and our community partners, in that a lot of this work wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the families and students and our other community partners who have welcomed us in the Denver metro area, who continue to be there in engaging and supporting as we work and supporting each other on these different things that we're talking about. And so we wanted to acknowledge and thank everyone throughout the time that the project we're going to be talking about has been going on. the last few years, we've had a number of people involved, and yeah, in thanking them and for their various involvement. I'm gonna let Chris and Sophia, if they want to say hi, and then Chris will get us started in our presentation.
Sophia, you want to go first? Then I can jump in.
I think you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I wasn't able to hear everything that you said, Angel, because you were cutting out. But thank you for inviting us. This is nice. And any of you guys who are willing to turn on your videos so we can see you, it would make us feel better. This online life is hard. Looking at these little black boxes makes me sad. So thank you very much for coming. My family is just north of where you guys are at in Humboldt, a little pace, in Coos Bay. So you just go up past Crescent City and keep driving past Coquel, and it's up there. And we're super glad to be here. And I'm in New York on Lenape and Shinnecock land, and I just hope everyone is doing well, and thank you.
Yat esh ya Christine Shet, Lani Diné and Nunt'zi Diné Bashichin Tatat Shigan. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Nelson. I am at the University of Denver, which, as Angel had mentioned, is the traditional homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute. Actually, Colorado has over, I think, 100 different tribes that have historic connections to Colorado as well. It was very much so the throughway between the northern portions of our tribes into the southern. So we have a lot of great history here. The waterways, the land itself speaks to us in many different ways, and we've just been able to really harness that beauty and try to engage our youth into those practices and understanding and connecting it to traditional knowledge and what science kind of entails as well. So what I'm going to do is I am going to talk a little bit about the framing of our project first, because it took a lot of time. That is one thing that I'm going to emphasize, is that how we as a collective of scholars that just happen to all be Indigenous women at the University of Denver, we all came to the university right about the same time. And we're just really trying to find a place to kind of create something that was meaningful, that was reciprocal, and also gave us that one little, something to look forward to as well. So in the work that we've been doing, we really try to center this idea around reciprocity, not research, and how that can engage our students to think about what science means and what learning and just the educational systems and how they work. So my background is in higher education. I focus a lot of my work in college access. So how do we change systems of higher education and education, K through 12 systems, to be more equitable and bring our students together and get them into higher education, not just to access it, but how can they actually see themselves in those systems of higher education. So for today, what we're going to focus on is, again, the program, which we have coined as Indigologics. We went through several different iterations of what this program actually meant, but we really landed on Indigologics because it was this notion of the indigenous knowledge and how we were logically connecting things together. So we'll talk again about the framework, and then I'll give you some examples of how we actually engaged in action around these ideas. So for that last part, if you have a minute to grab a piece of paper and pencil or pen, that would be really great, because like I said, we have an activity planned a little bit later. All right, so the framing that we tried to draw upon was a mixture between so myself, like I said, I'm in the field of education. Angel has been focused primarily in history, and then Sophia is in the hard sciences. So how do you actually blend all these different knowledge systems together was one of our challenges. But I think that actually brought us closer together as a collective, because we had to see our perspectives through different ways of learning. And even the individuals that we also collaborated with, we had a few graduate students that were working on their dissertations. We had practitioners that have been in the field of education, K through 12 in particular, for quite some time. We had elders. So really being able to draw upon this interdisciplinary idea around knowledge building and creation. And so we had these kind of three contingencies. We had, of course, us at the University of Denver, the schools and communities, and then our families and students that we were trying to balance between. And so what we ultimately ended up with, because there was three primary areas that we were interested in working through, one is what we've coined as relationality. And we'll go into these components a little bit more in the future. So there's relationality, knowledge, and answerability. And so each of these are, again, we went through many different iterations of how we actually call these things. And so I'll just talk a little bit more about that. I think it'd be easier. So I'll start with answerability. And answerability is really informed by this idea around decolonizing education, how we can be, who are we answerable to, and who is it that we're actually speaking to whenever we're either creating curriculum or trying to write scholarly journals, so trying to be mindful around that as well. So I was part of that lead process. And what I often say is that we would think of answerability through a normative Western idea as assessment. So everything that we did was grant funded. So we knew that in the end, we had to be thinking mindfully about how are we showing our quote unquote impact and what are the actions that we're taking. But rather than using the grant as the kind of the guiding principles around that, we wanted to use this idea around how do we maintain accountable to our communities and not seeing our students as the ones that are under the microscope that we're trying to say like establish their understanding and growth, but how are we in community with them? How are we in community with each other? And so whenever we were thinking about assessment, we developed these protocols essentially that would make us answerable to the community. And one of the first things that we did as a community is said that we will not study our students. We are not going to report on them. We're not going to assess them because we really don't feel like that is how we stay answerable to them. We wanted them to feel like every time they came into our space that we were listening to their voices and trying to build that stronger relationship with them rather than, again, treating it as they are something to be fixed or something that is wrong with them, because that's often how they get treated in Western educational systems. And again, we really worked intentionally around bringing our students together, bringing our community together at each point in time. I think we had probably maybe around like 5 to 7 meetings before we actually started the delivery of the curriculum and engaging students in that process as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sophia to talk about this relationality, how we actually work with the students.
So we did a bunch of stuff over a period of like, I guess the last 4 years, but it was mostly trying to give them some kind of experience of math and science, which was place-based, right? Trying to be in a place where there was elders and community members, where the science and math wasn't so dry and sterile and removed from anything that has meaning or value, right? So you can see in that picture that the kids, the little kids, like my son, Chris's son, are all in there with like the high school kids, and the undergrads were teaching everyone, but so were the elders, right? And the community leaders were in there teaching and doing math where you could actually like walk around the teepee and measure how many footsteps and then measure your foot to figure out the value of pi. So yeah, they have to know that stuff at least until the whole colonial settler system burns, but they have to know it in a way that they can actually care, right? And so like Mayan math was one of my favorites because there's one piece of Indian land in Denver called the Tall Memorial Grounds, and that piece of land like is where we would try to do a lot of our activities. And we did Mayan math out there, and there was a guy named David Aktekpatsin from Boulder who was like a big community leader up there, but he's actually taught himself Mayan math because that's his ancestral lineage, though his family was part of the Hanisados who got enslaved in New Mexico. The children were taken from their families. So he taught us a bunch of stuff that day. Even to this day, I don't fully understand all of it. It was profound. Because the Mayan math has a base 5 and a base 20 counting system. So the system we use now is base 10, which is Gregorian, which is why we have to fix the calendar by a whole day every 4 years, right? But the Mayan calendar, you fix it by nanoseconds on the scale of tens of thousands of years, right? But it's 3 interlocking wheels. So it's a totally different thought system than what we have. But as soon as the conquistadors got to Mexico, they burned all those libraries. So there's like one manuscript left that some priest hid somewhere or something. You know, we try to scrape it together from that. But anyhow, he came and he taught us because he has like some kind of epiphany of how to understand it. But we had the kids and the high schoolers, everyone on the ground using their fingers to manipulate shells and sticks because it's a different base counting system. And in that system, they encourage you to use your fingers. And one of the girls was like, you know, in school, they would give us shame if we used our fingers to count, right? That was somehow showed that we were less or stupid if our bodies were involved in learning, right? Like to really be smart, your body doesn't really exist. Isaac Newton kind of stuff. So that was awesome to me, right? Just that there was somehow a return on the logic in her brain, right? That it wasn't shameful, right? That it was, you know, a beautiful sunny day. Everyone was happy and having a good time. Huge group of kids and their parents and the elders all listening to David manipulate this different number system, you know, and he showed them a bunch of the archetypal animals and I don't even know what on the calendar. So for me, like going through school, the first few years, like I was in a retarded class because I wouldn't engage. Like I wouldn't talk. I didn't like it, you know? And my mom mostly didn't make us go. We'd be in the woods all the time. So like when I was in the retarded class, it didn't have windows, which forced me to want to do reading and stuff because that was the only way to get in the room where they had the windows. But I think the system is fundamentally flawed. I think that it was so hard for me, even as white passing as I am, to get my PhD. It almost broke my back. And I had a daughter, a single parent, everything, right? So I think that the system can't be that hard, you know? And if it is that hard and if it's that separated from like what actually matters, right? If the consequences of our science system is that we destroy our water, that our fisheries are depleted, that our forests are all burning, right? Like Native people know how to manage forests, but they don't let us, right? There's a newspaper article today on the Yuroks trying to manage their forests, but the Forest Service is in the way, right? So, I mean, it's fundamentally flawed, the entire system, we know that. But trying to work within that, give kids like some way that they can hang on, you know, that's kind of where we're at. And those of you who are young kids, I wish it was better, you know? That's all I have to say.
And one of the other components, so in thinking about the knowledge that's brought in, we did a lot of workshops and activities and working with our community partners that we had open to students and their families. Like, so you had students of varying ages, many of them bringing different, like younger siblings, their different parents, everyone, and of recognizing all of these folks who are coming together in community have their own knowledge bases, and we can all come together and learn these different concepts and these different ideas, like as a community. It doesn't have to be a student alone with an instructor or in a classroom with other students with one instructor. It can be everyone together talking about these math and science concepts. And one of the things that was mentioned before that came up is we're all coming through the K through 12 education system and have our own relationship to math and science. So we worked with, so that was an interesting conversation to have. One of the questions on the Padlet is actually asking you if you want to share what is your relationship to math and science? What did that look like? You know, because some people have experiences that make them not want to engage or are scared to engage with math and science. And it happens, or it can happen early on. And if there's like one, and so that's something we even talk to the older high school age students about, is what does it feel like to be in your classes? In recognizing that they're there as like whole people. And what is it? Yeah. And to kind of like acknowledge and validate that experience, and that we all have the capability of understanding. And so it's also, so I feel like that's important and coming into spaces, like acknowledging we all have that, we're like all, you know, and we engage with it differently. Next slide for this. But so all the community members, we were lucky to have community educators, and we're going to talk about a couple of the workshops we did in a couple slides, but we were lucky to have different community educators who are willing to engage with activities that are bringing together Indigenous knowledges and using math and science language and showing that these things can be related to each other, and that we can center Indigenous values and methods within while using the language of math and science. Part of the purpose is to disrupt normative westernized models and reclaim lessons that encourage Native identity, placement, and growth. So I know when thinking about myself, when I'm an urban Native person. I'm first generation raised away from the reservation. My sister and I were both first generation raised away. And in our schooling, at least, well, I can't speak to my sisters, but in my schooling, we didn't talk about Native stuff. All of the information I received about Ho-Chunk cultural knowledge was at home. And what would usually happen, and I think it's like a personality, you know, it depends on the person, but my personality is I would learn something and want to bring it into the classroom. I would change the assignment to fit Ho-Chunk culture. And so if the assignment was to pick any short story and write an essay on it, I would pick a Native author to do my short story on. And I think a lot of, you know, I can't speak to the experience of like Native people in urban areas, but I think many people end up working within the curriculum that way. And so it's to disrupt the idea that the standard or normative is like the Western. It's okay to have, you know, Indigenous knowledge and Native people can be the center instead of having to, you know, shoehorn ourselves into the existing model. And so it's kind of those different concepts that we were thinking of ways of how to integrate it within, different workshops. But we figured that out early on, is if we wanted to do a workshop with students, it's best to have a very flexible and open space that allows families and other people to just join and engage also. Next slide.
I think before we move on to the activities and just kind of showing some more concrete ideas of how we've engaged in this, just want to see if there's any questions that folks might have in terms of maybe the program or need clarification on any of the areas that we had just covered. And let me check the chat to make sure that we're okay. All right. So one of the things that we always did really very explicitly with our students was asking them to, asking ourselves to be vulnerable in those spaces. And as Sophia and Angel shared that they've all had different experiences with math and had different interpretations, I often kind of come from a different perspective. And I think a lot of it has to do with just how I was taught by other people in my community, in particular my mother. So I enjoyed math. Math came really easily to me. The idea behind it, the concepts, but I think a lot of it had to do because my older brother taught me everything I knew. He was 4 years older and he would always kind of just sit with me. And so it was that relational standpoint of like someone older teaching me something. And so it gave me a very positive association with math as the learning concept. the dynamics around it, like the learning of it in the classroom, was awful. I actually grew up on a border town, so we had about 30% Native students in our classroom on average. And so as I got older into my math classes, I noticed that I was often the only Native person in those classrooms that were doing like pre-algebra whenever you were in grade 7, or algebra 2 when you were in grade 8. And so what would happen is I would then even feel more isolated in those spaces. There was one other Native girl that was taking the same classes, but interestingly enough, they always separated us. She was always in one class and I was in the other class. And I always thought, like, what's the coincidence of that? Wouldn't you want another Native person to be able to be with another Native person? But in reality, that happened all throughout high school, where we were never placed in the same classroom. And as a result, I actually, once I finished my requirements for high school, like to graduate, I just stopped. I could have easily have probably completed at least AP calculus before I graduated, but I didn't, because no one pushed me. No one said that this is a really great opportunity for you to continue on, even though I really enjoyed it, right? So I think for me, like my personal experience is different, but I think the structural systems around it were not promoting this idea around how math can actually be a benefit for myself, for my community. And I definitely did not have the same relationships with, or the same feelings around the Western concept of learning than from what I learned with my brother whenever I was younger as well too. So there was a question regarding like curriculum. So we actually have a few curriculum pieces that we're working on. Our other colleague, Dr. Michelle Garcia-Olb, she's actually our curriculum specialist, and she's the one that has been working through developing these a little bit more. One of the things that we, and I'll get to this on their actual next slide, is this idea around like who is part of our community. And so she's been working a lot with the Denver the American Indian Academy of Denver, and helping them develop their curriculum as well. It's a new grades, I think middle school. So I think it's like 6th to 8th grade that they just started here in Denver. That's a STEAM-based school. And so they really focus in on Indigenous knowledge. And so we were very fortunate whenever we started our programming to partner with them and the school leaders in that area and be able to just kind of work with them. So along with that, we also worked a lot with Colorado Public Schools, a lot of the Indian Ed departments, parent action committees, to be able to see like what parents are needing, so that way we can also stay in balance with what students' expectations were. So Sophia mentioned the Talbot Memorial Grounds, which is just south of Denver. That is land protected through 2022. That the city of Denver has actually given to Native people. And so it can be used for ceremonial purposes, community gatherings. And so we have been just very fortunate to be part of that community, to be able to bring our students into that space as well. So our first few years that we were developing in Digilogix, I would say that we were pretty gun-ho and we were making a lot of progress. I'm on the tenure track as a faculty member. Sophia is a teaching professor, and Angel actually found another job at a different university and is also on the tenure track. For us to be community engaged scholars has, without a doubt been a challenge, right? To how do we continue our community-based organizing while still meeting the demands of making tenure or making promotion in those years. So what we have been able to do is to continue to work with our local Indian Ed programs and just providing the knowledge and support that we can in terms of helping our Native students, and also continuing to engage with our elders in various different ways. Like I'd mentioned earlier, we had the American Indian Academy of Denver that we worked a lot with. And the image that's on the slide right now was actually a connection that they made with us with Running Horse Livingston on his wigwametry. And so this was a really great example of how, you turn the body into actually learning math. And so what he had us do was form a circle, and through these different movements that he was having us do, helped us understand like how pi was actually calculated. And so for Livingston, he has this whole curriculum based upon the wigwametry of how to develop geometry curriculum as well. And so we were very fortunate to be able to have our students participate in that, and just gave us a lot of hope of like what is happening across the Americas, right, and the Turtle Island, if you will, to see like how we're reclaiming these spaces of education to be able to have it more relevant to for our Native students as well. Sophia, do you want to talk a little bit about how the bike club has actually been kind of an offshoot of this project as well too?
Yeah, so we started a bike club just to get kids like going around to the schools and delivering labs. And so we got a ton of bikes donated and got a bunch of kids working on the bikes and got like equipment to fix the bikes, and then COVID hit, right? So we have not been biking much this year, and we're not delivering labs on bikes. I think we thought we were going to do a lot of remote learning labs this year. At least I did when COVID first hit, and I was like, oh, all my teaching is online, you know? But then I'm responsible for my son's online education now, and the ability for me to like send extra time on the screen just doesn't exist. Like I can't stand it. So what I'm thinking is that, because we were calling these math pods. We had did this before in Boston with the North American Indian Center and MIT when I was a postdoc. And the idea was that we called them math pods because we wanted little groups of kids that were community learners, and they learned together, they learned outside, they learned math and science in a fractal universe, right? Where you're surrounded by actually perfect geometry. But, and that was the idea with the bike club too, right? Just get kids outside, get them fit, get them out there get the undergrads and the high school kids taking math and science to the little kids in the after school programs. But now with COVID, like, I don't know, I feel like it's gonna become harder and harder for me to do Zoom. Like I'm just so over it. Oh yeah, so those of you who just joined us, can you please, I'm begging you, turn your videos on for me, because I teach all day and looking at these little blank screens kills me. Thank you so much. Yeah, okay. So yeah, so I don't really know, like, because ever since Standing Rock, I've been dreaming about March of this year, and what happened was COVID, you know? And so those elders at Standing Rock, they said, if you can't stop the black snake, it signifies the end of days. So I feel like something is real here, you know? And we have to be ready. And I don't know what that looks like. Like we try to prepare our community, our children, our families in Denver, you know, but now I'm in New York with family, and I don't really know, but I think locally we can make change. Locally, we can definitely do math in the woods, you know?
And I think one of the things that I really appreciate in terms of the bike club is it extended our network around not just including our Indigenous students as well, but non-Indigenous students who are willing to share their knowledge, and whether it was through biking or through camping or just their outdoors experiences. So we have, I think, in a way shown the University of Denver from our perspective that we can have the Indigenous knowledges and ways of engaging can actually bring together multiple sectors of our departments together and students to engage with each other when maybe they typically wouldn't as well too. So let me move on to the next one. So again, here are some examples of what we have been able to work with in terms of students, with our students. So Sophia had mentioned earlier using teepees and to try to understand like dimensions around circles, cones, and having students actually use parts of their body to be able to determine some of these mathematical kind of understandings. Another session that we had was around drum making, where we had an elder come in and talk about how do we know how much hide we need to cover a drum? How do you measure it? How do you make sure that you are creating the ties in the appropriate spaces? And so really, again, these things that students, like a lot of our Native students might see in their cultural home, like in their homes, can then say like, wow, this is actually a mathematical kind of understanding of ourselves and our beings, right? And so being able to have our students then make those connections has been really powerful. And then the next image to the right of that is the wigwametry that students had to develop. And the next one is related to the pine cone. Sophia, do you want to talk a little bit about that idea?
So there's this wonderful pattern that's in pine cones and in galaxies and in flowers and in cauliflower and in like the shape of your ear. And it's called by the Italian guy, Fibonacci, who is given credit for it. But it's something that Native people have recognized in their basket designs and basket hats. Like there's actually a book on the Karuk basket hats where it shows the different Fibonacci numbers in the Karuk hats versus the Tlingit hats, right? So like Native people have been using this, and like the focus of this Fibonacci sequence in the Karuk hats is in the top of the head, whereas the one up in the Tlingits is above the head, right? And so it's just interesting, right? To my mind, what did it mean, right? What were those old timers thinking when they were making these hats? And like Chris's family is from the Diné and they have like these weavers, right, to make these great big rugs, but they weave the patterns without drawing them, right? And so, I mean, like they're not supposed to draw it, right? They're supposed to see the entire thing in their head before they get started. And like I've been trying to weave basket hats since I was a young kid, and it's still not going that well, but the joy in it, right? And the math that's in it of doing that and looking for how you build the basket and how you make the patterns. And so the Fibonacci patterns, are we gonna do this, guys? Are we doing water first and then the pine cones?
We're not going to do the pine cones, but there's more on the pine cones on the Padlet.
Okay.
Just because it would be hard to do.
No, I know it would be hard to do. So basically, if you're interested, there's like this idea that in a pine cone, there's Fibonacci numbers and they're adjacent numbers. So Fibonacci numbers are like you take 0 and 1 to start the sequence, and then the next number is the sum of those two. So it's 0 plus 1 is 1. But then the next subsequent number is the sum of the previous two. So 1 plus 1 is 2, right? And then you keep going. So 2 plus 1 is 3. And then you go 2 plus 3 is 5, right? So 5, then 8, then 13, and then 21, and then 34, 55. Okay, so I'm not going to try to keep going and embarrass myself with my arithmetic, but the idea is that these numbers are all like our inheritance, right? And these patterns are the way that the universe is built. Like galaxies are made in the same way. The sunflowers are perfect Fibonacci spirals. They're different numbers, right? The pine cone is usually 8 and 13 and 21. Sunflowers are like 55 and 89 and like very high numbers, right? Because they have so many spirals in them. Galaxies, I don't know. They're like 1 and 1 or something. They don't have that many spirals. But anyhow, that's, I think, is there more, Angel, or is that enough?
I think that's good. But a lot of this, so on the Padlet, there's a video that's actually through Khan Academy. They have this really helpful video that talks about the golden ratio and Fibonacci numbers and how you can count them on a pine cone. And I remember, and we showed that to students, but one interesting aspect of it is that in the video, they mention, we don't know how plants grew this way. They're not smart enough to grow this way. And I was like, well, hold up, like that's like a very human-centered way of thinking. How do we not, like, we can't say what plants don't know. And I was like, and so we had like a conversation about that, well, let's just say that they do know what they're doing and they created those numbers, and it just shows, like, who's to say the plant didn't make the numbers, you know what I mean? And so I think even just like flipping some of those concepts in recognizing our like non-human relatives is something and have a conversation about non-human relatives in math and science. And so I think it's really important to bring to the table, and it says a lot. And really, even through that one activity as an example, as an adult, so I don't remember learning Fibonacci. I think it's actually part of the curriculum for like K through 12, but I do not remember it. I don't remember learning it, but now I see it everywhere. So I think it's kind of interesting too. And me and one of my colleagues who also worked in the workshop, who was a grad student at the time, we still say that's a Fibonacci spiral. So I think it, and I'm like, if it's having that much of an impact on adults and of us thinking about where math exists in nature and in our own lives, then I think that is like a testament to the importance of engaging in this with math and science in this way. And so, yeah, and so this is to think about how our environment does communicate with us, because like through that logic, I think you could actually argue, or I would argue, that these plants in the environment, they are communicating math to us. In my experience, that's not how math is taught. Like math and science wasn't taught to me in that way. It was more of like the human as the center and then looking at these patterns. But I think that in just kind of like flipping and bringing in these different indigenous philosophies and ideas, it kind of shows like how they all intersect and connect. A couple of the other, I guess, workshops or ways that we've bridged or try to talk about these math and science concepts with indigenous theory and philosophies, like the drum making example that we saw prior. We actually had an astronomy and stargazing where we went to an observatory, and I believe they were in physics. We had a faculty member give us a tour of the observatory, and we were able to talk about telescopes. And then we had a community educator talk about Lakota star maps and how Lakotas had their own star maps. And we were able to actually do a stargazing night at Talbot Memorial Grounds. Yeah, so and which was a community event. And so of like showing that indigenous storytelling, we had our technologies present too that are on par with Western technologies. And then with the teepee, we connected with physics and mathematics. And of course, water is the foundation to existence of these lessons. And we're going to talk a little bit about the water unit specifically in a couple of slides. But I have, could you flip to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so one of the things that this stood out to me when we were doing our, one of the things that I really very much appreciate about working with Sophia as a native scientist was that she really, and it's funny because I think about it now, and I'm like, that was really important. She reiterated that, but she really reiterated the importance of students note-taking everything, like getting used to writing everything down in keeping like a lab notebook of everything that we're doing during that time, because it is good practice. It's part of scientific inquiry, and encouraging students to be able to do that with everything that they do, I think is important. And one of the activities that we did is we had a teepee set up at Talbot, and we asked students, how do you think, because many of them hadn't actually set one up before. And so we asked them, how do you think we set this up? How do you think we and our ancestors constructed this? What does it look like? And so they sat and they like walked around it, walked inside of it, thought about it, and we talked about it. And one of our community elders was funny, and he was like, I asked that question before to some non-native people, and one of the non-native people said, someone has to climb up there and tie the poles together, right? someone has to climb up there and tie it, right? And he's like, no. And he's like, no, well, no, that's not how we put it, but that's a good guess. Next slide. And so after like having these conversations with students, they're able to actually like engage with the method that has been used for a long time in making, you know, this teepees and these housings. And so it's actually made first with a tripod of poles are put up. And then each of the poles are lean upon those three posts that are put up. And one of the things is like of learning that that tripod is one of the strongest structures in geometry that can exist. And actually a teepee can withstand about 2,000 pounds of pressure, in that this isn't something you can just knock down, right? This is something this is a very strong structure. And the indigenous engineering involved in knowledge in the constructing of this, and that this is something that our youth are able to construct themselves and interact with and see, you know, engage with. I remember, so that activity stood out to me in kind of showing the hands-on aspect and how math and the language of like math and science can be used with our I guess like you know, with these structures that we create. And we even did like diameter and volume kind of activities with this, but I wanted to share that as an example. Does anyone want to add anything? We can move on to our next activity. Okay.
No, I appreciate that detail, because I think I remember the students, like every time we would kind of show a kind of an example and make those connections, how they would actually be like, I remember this, but now this makes so much more sense to me, right? So they themselves were like making these connections across different spaces. And I just also wanted to send one quick note that we had a video that we were going to show of the students' experiences, but unfortunately the video disappeared somewhere, and so we didn't have time to recreate it. But that was kind of like our way to show the voices of the students. And then we also planned to bring in some additional undergraduate students to talk. But if you are familiar with the University of Denver, we're kind of working through some issues around our moniker, which is the pioneer. So a lot of our undergraduate students are extremely taxed right now. And we just wanted to be, you know, not add an additional pressure for them to have to present today as well. The other part is, and we'll talk a little bit about, I think this with our activity that we're going to have you all work through, is really emphasizing the idea that our students are like our relatives and that we need to care for them. We want them to develop a love for themselves, a love for each other, a love for science, a love for their community. And so a lot of times we engaged in different practices around self-care. And I'll never forget the one time a parent came and said, this is the first time my teenage son has ever come home and actually shared what his day was like. And he talked about all the activities that he went through. And she said that was just one of the most beautiful moments that she's had, because for so many years, you know how teenagers are, they kind of like, oh, everything's fine, everything's good, you know, nothing happened. But he came home and was really excited. And so for us, that anecdotal information really kind of affirmed that what we're doing is we're instilling this self-efficacy and self-love for a student and how they see themselves in the learning spaces as well. So Angel, did you want to go ahead and start us on this activity here?
Yes. So you will need, so I really wanted to do, so we thought it would be really good to do an activity with you. That was one that we did with some of the high school students. And if I remember correctly, they ranged in ages of 14 to 17. there was a graduating senior in there. 14 to 17, and then some of the other activities were open to the families and communities. But this is one that we did with them, and in kind of like thinking about these ideas of like the whole student and the whole person. And so on one of the afternoons, we did this with them. So you'll just need a paper and a pen. And we did this activity on self-talk because we're in thinking about scientific efficacy, even education efficacy, like how well you feel like you can do in the classroom. It's really important to feel like you can accomplish and have the means to accomplish a task, like, which, I mean, people have connected that to like self-esteem and self-confidence, like being in thinking about participating within the classroom. And so we developed this activity on self-talk. Self-talk simply refers to the way you talk or think to yourself during the day. List the positive and negative things you say to yourself, and then draw what you would look like based on your self-talk if you were a body of water. What positive things are in your body of water? What negative things are there? So I'm actually we're all going to do this. So hopefully you have a piece of paper or something you can draw on. So what do you think? 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes? We're going to have you draw and work on this. And then there's a second part that I'll put up in a couple minutes. Chris, can you hit the second bullet? So the second part of this is if you draw 2 more things that can keep your body of water healthy in your picture. Okay. So if you're on Facebook and doing this activity, you can actually take a picture of what you did on your phone and post it on the Padlet. You're welcome to do that. So in thinking about this, I wanted to share out some of the examples. So I'm hoping some people will step up and share what you drew. I believe in showing by example, so I'll share mine real quick, and it's up to Chris or Sophia if you want to share yours, but I drew a little, mine doesn't make sense environmentally, like I have a turtle in there in a lake, but what I have is, and I'll take a picture and post it on the Padlet, but I had algae represent my negative thoughts, like thoughts of like, I don't think I can do this, or doubt. I have a lot of doubt a lot of times where I'm like, oh, I don't know about if I'm doing this good enough. Yeah, that's a lot of my negative self-talk is you're not doing this good enough. So I have algae to represent that. And then I have a boat stuck in some grass to represent how I feel. A lot of times when I feel stuck due to negativity is I feel stuck there. But for the positive things is sometimes I am confident and I do feel less stressed. And I have a turtle and some fish, and I have some insects flying around that are food for the fish. That are some of the healthy things that and healthy soil in the bottom of the lake is what I drew to show those positive things that are keeping it healthy. I don't know if anyone else wants to share.
I'm photographing mine right now. I'm willing to share, but I drew all the bad things on a separate chunk. I didn't want it next to my water. Maybe someone else can go first because I'm a little slow.
I can go, and I posted mine on the Padlet. So let me share the Padlet just so you all can, if you haven't had a chance to actually see what it looks like. So if you're curious also how to post, it's really accessible through a phone even. You just put in the website and then it'll come right up. And so what you do is you just click this little plus sign under whichever column you want to add something. And so this is my image here that I shared. Here you can kind of see that this is the main body of water. I had some just waves, just maybe sometimes those things that kind of disrupt the peacefulness. And then I had like the animals that are kind of still coming to the water. I don't know what kind of animal this is, but it started off as like a coyote, then it turned into like a squirrel. I don't know. Something that likes water, right? And then we had the bushes here kind of off to the side. The darker side down here is kind of like this. It reminds me of just like that stale water that kind of pools up. I do a lot of fishing here in Colorado, so that just kind of reminds me of those kind of like spaces where you're like not sure what is actually in there. Do you want to get near it? And to add to like that idea around what keeps me healthy or what keeps the body of water healthy, I brought in these streams to kind of indicate like this kind of incoming and outgoing of the positive and the negative. And then of course the sun up here was also another thing I added to make it feel a little bit more like what gives it life as well too. So anyone else?
I guess I could go. So this is my drawing. It's kind of like my head with a bunch of like rivers flowing out of it. And some of those rivers are like really strong and healthy, and there's a lot of water flowing through them. And those are my good thoughts, like, you can do this, and you did a really good job on that. And then one of them, I didn't know how to draw pollution, but one of them with all the dots is like really polluted. And then this one has like dams on it. And those are like the thoughts of like, you're not good enough and you didn't do a good enough job on that. And so I drew a bomb next to the dams, but just those thoughts need to go. And a shovel next to the pollution, because that's more of like a slow process of just like one step at a time, get rid of those bad thoughts.
That's wonderful. I uploaded my picture, but I don't want to upload the bad one because it just was a bunch of words that I say in my, no, just because it's ugly, right? Like if I mean, I can show you guys, but I don't want to leave it on the Padlet because everything is so pretty on there. But it's just, I'll show you both. Okay. So, okay, if I can figure out how to use my computer. Okay, so this is, oh, can I share the screen or do I not have that? Oh yeah, I do. Okay, this is all my good things. So my Umpqua River is where I grew up, so it's my favorite place. And I just wrote good things that come to mind, which internally are like part of me, right? Because I grew up there, so I just think all those things are mine. So like the animals and free kittens and water, and deep water, shallow water, everything. But then bad words that I think of all the time as well, which since Angel did this activity with us and Alyssa, like what, 4 years ago, I tried to catch myself, you know? I'm just gonna show you really fast because I'm ashamed of them, right? These are shameful words, my secret shame, right? But just like all the things that run through my head every day, right? All the time. And we were at this SACNAS conference last week and I was talking and there was a bunch of Native women, we gave our talks, and then later there was a panel of African-American women, Latinx women that were talking, and half of them said we experienced stereotype threat. we experience imposter syndrome, like we're fakes, we shouldn't be here. But half of them were like, we never feel that. We are such bad bitches, we never feel that. And I was like, wow, okay. So if you don't feel it, good for you. You know, if you don't ever talk bad for yourself, that's wonderful. But if you do, you got to stop, you know, you have to catch yourself, because that's settler colonialism, right? That is some inherited stereotyping that you do to yourself. And it's just poison, right? And that, thank you, Angel, for, you know, making us cognizant of that.
And it's interesting, because I think that's like, I wish someone had talked to me about that when I was 14, you know, and because it's something I didn't learn till I was like in my mid-20s, you know what I mean? Like, and it makes a difference, you know, and I think to even through this activity, it cracked me up, because the students, some of them like rolled their eyes, but were like, fine, and did it for us. And like, they talked about it, you know, and they humored us, but I hope that they look back and think about that. Like, how are you talking to yourself? And you don't have to talk, you know, you don't have to talk to yourself that way, and you can say good things. Like, that's what we taught. That's what Alyssa and I said, is like, you know, we, you know, it's important for us to talk to ourselves like respectfully, you know, and it makes a difference, because when we're doing math or science, and if that sneaks in, that language, if I can't do this, and you get frustrated and don't want to do it, then instead of trying to like work through that problem, and you know, it's okay if you got it wrong, you know, you do it, let's do it again together and work through it is really important. It's like the stick-to-itiveness of knowing you will get there. Even if it takes a little bit longer, you will get there, and that's okay. And I think a lot of times in K through 12 that that's not considered at the time.
Right, the thoughtfulness, right? The thoughtfulness of our old timers, like how they would really think about things. Chris is always saying, let's be intentional about this. But merit is given in this system to being fast, right? The faster you are, the smarter you are, no? If you're slow, ooh, what's wrong with you, you know?
I put Western ways of thinking as my negative. Western ways of thinking, and another negative is land back. But this is my picture. So I'm from Hawaii, and I mean, actually the only thing that gets me out of my Western ways of thinking is I teach the kids in our family Hawaiian language and Hawaiian studies. And so right in the middle of the wave here, it says tired.
Can we see?
Yeah, it says, can you see it? Tired. So I'm happy to just be with people who are like sharing the same mindset, you know. It can make you think like you're a little bit crazy. Like, am I crazy here, or are these people not getting what I'm saying?
It's really pretty waves too. So I have good news for any of you guys who actually thinking about doing physics, is that when I graduated in 2011, I think I was maybe one of the only Native women that got a PhD in physics. Like, I couldn't find anyone else, and I was asking people at SACNAS and ACES everywhere nationally. But now there's like somewhere around 30 of us. And I mean, it's women and men, but 30 Native physicists, and like at different levels, undergrads, masters, PhD, people doing technical, a lot of Native Hawaiian women that are so amazing. I'm pretty sure actually one of them is where the entire community sort of gravitated to her, because she's so charismatic. So props to Hawaii.
Does anyone else want to share? I saw some people posted on the Padlet.
I can go. I feel very inspired by the ones that you guys have shared. I think I kind of interpreted the activity as like drawing water that reflected like just like my emotions and stuff. So I just try to draw like a river, and like it's like really wide and like with rapids at like some points represents like panic attacks and like times when I'm really mean to myself, and sometimes it's like really narrow and kind of blocked, like me representing when I like feel like my emotions are really blocked. But then also other parts like have like plants and animals and like are like a healthy ecosystem. And I tried to, for like drawing what can make my body of water healthier, I also like some other people wrote about like a strong like foundation of like the like soil and bedrock underneath as being important, and then also like clearing some of the blocks in the river, and like giving myself permission to like be like water and kind of like flood sometimes, or like just move through everything like that I need to move through. But yeah, I really love this activity. Thank you for proposing it.
Yeah, thank you, Angel.
Cool. Okay. Should we go back to the presentation? But I encourage you, if you got little ones in your house, this is something fun you can do on a weekend, you know, start talking about these, putting work, man. So I don't know, like I said, there's a lot of like, you know, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma that I'm working through. And I didn't even know how to identify emotions. Like I didn't learn that till I was over 18. So I'm a little behind on some things, but I'm learning it now, right? And that's okay. But yeah, I'm now learning how to identify different things that I'm feeling. It's important to do with little ones. So I encourage you to do this with people in your life. Next slide. Okay, so we did holistic activities, and like encouraging students to think about like where they are as people, in addition to other activities that included, again, scientific and math, and introducing students to basic science concepts. We did a pH level testing where they tested pH level of different waters. They gathered water from outside, and then we tested different bottled water and tap water and looked at the different pH levels. We had a guest speaker from chemistry come in and talk about different ways of looking at the health of water and what that means, and different ways of assessing that. And that they're in the bringing in ideas that you can assess both with your eyes, but also through the scientific method, and of waterways in general. And we also we were able to have community members come and talk about the Standing Rock and No DAPL movement. And we had some students join us whose families are active, were active in No DAPL, and for them to be able to share their experiences. And I think like something that I really appreciated, again, was being able to spend time talking about all of these things without feeling like they're all like divided between each other. I think it's like really important to acknowledge that, you know, all of these things are interrelated and are important in understanding. Yeah, it's important to understand like all different facets of these issues. But that's just an outline of some of the activities that we did. Next slide. And so when we were designing these like workshops and different community events, we wanted to, some of the things that we kept in mind was an interdisciplinary approach. So we have people, so I'm in the field of like history and Native studies. Chris is from the higher education, and, you know, Sophia in physics. And we had some graduate students in social work working with us too, in thinking about all of the, this interdisciplinary approach to science and math, in working with like youth and families, I think is a strength, and that this was very intentional. And again, drawing on our strengths and honesty about our positionality. A lot of us have had different experiences with math and science. And even in terms of thinking about what it means to be part of a Native community, because again, Denver metro area, you know, that's an urban Indian community. There's some families who've been here for a long time. There's some that have, you know, moved here and are part of the community. Yeah, and so coming from different places and having different backgrounds and being able to talk about your different Native experiences and what that means, I think it, you know, factored into this. And we also integrated cultural protocols. So when we would do the pine cone activity, like the Fibonacci activity, we would, we pick up pine cones, but we also leave out bird seed. And as like a thank you for, you know, in recognizing, again, the land in what it's giving, in being able to do that. And it's funny, I just remembered, Sophia, when you invited us to talk to those kindergarteners, we did that too, gave out birdseed and talked about the importance of thanking the land. So even in bridging, like, yeah, in like introducing like and bridging Indigenous ideologies and philosophies in that way, I think is important. And then when we would have community meals, having elders go first and supplying food to the community was important for our gatherings. I don't know if people want to add anything.
I think for myself, like I really felt like again, like how Angel said, that the intentionality was very clear in terms of holding ourselves accountable too. So while we may not always have the right answer, or maybe even having a disagreement within our own closed area, to be able to say, hey, how do we handle this? How do we work through it? So that way we maintain the goal, right, which is to work with students and to foster this idea around their love for themselves as well too. We do have a few more slides left, but I also recognize that we're coming towards like the last 10 minutes of the presentation. So we wanted to be able to give attendees a chance to speak or ask any questions if there may be any.
I have a question, I guess. I'm just wondering, how do I'm really lucky where I am. I live on Karuk land, and our local school district, the Klamath Trinity School District, has an Indian education director who is just amazing, Margot Robbins. And then we also work with Kate Lowry, who was on here earlier, who is in Blue Lake area. But I'm wondering, like, how did the school districts and people that you and other scientists you work with treat your knowledge? Are you treated with respect, and is the school districts really open to making sure that you can get this in front of the kids, or do you have to really fight for that?
I can speak a little bit to that. So in the context of Denver, right, so it's, for one, it's a relocation site. So there's, like as Angel had mentioned, there's a lot of diversity across Indigenous communities and representations. There's also 4 different Indian Ed departments that operate within the greater Denver area. So that really complicates things because you have to deal with funding, right? So if, say for instance, Denver Public Schools has a specific funding for students that are in the Denver Public School systems, like how do you then outreach to students who are in Aurora or that are in the Jeffco region, right? So we were actually very fortunate because we weren't associated necessarily with any specific school district to be able to then just come in together and bridge these different communities together as well. Sorry. Cat encore.
I mean, I would say, Regina, that you're very lucky, because what we have seen is that there has been a lot of work before we ever even got here there was a lot of development of curriculum and stuff that was supplied to the public schools. And just today, my son was given an assignment to read about the very people who did the Sand Creek Massacre, and they were heroes in this paper. And I just wrote to the teacher, he's not going to do this, right? Because I know for a fact that Jeffco and Diné has supplied them with curriculum. You understand? But they just ignore it. So, yeah, it's definitely you guys are lucky out there.
Well, we are, but I've noticed when we go into Siskiyou County, because my son has gone to Siskiyou County schools too, and Humboldt County. And when we go into Siskiyou County, we get more of that type of curriculum. Like, that's really terrible. But also, like, it's really easy for us to do work with the kids, like in the Hoopa High School or in our school district. But as soon as we get out of that area, where we're starting to try to work in Redding or Wairika or areas like that, it starts becoming really difficult, and people, you deal with like so much more like racism and poor treatment of the Native students. So that's why I was kind of asking how it's been for you all to get into the school districts. Thank you.
And to kind of add on to that a little bit more, the ability for us to kind of go in and out of those spaces also provides us a little bit more, I guess you could say, like the academic freedom to teach those things that might be perceived as a little more controversial to mainstream kind of ideas of education. The one thing that I also am very cognizant of is how we're preparing our students to then re-engage back into the normative constructs of colonial education, right? So we actually see that a lot of our high school students were also leaders in the community who would speak out against their curriculum. So we would have to kind of teach the students or affirm that you're going to probably face some challenges, right? If you speak out against what your teacher is saying, there is going to be some challenges. And what does that mean? How do you keep those lines of communication? How do we help parents feel like they can also support their children as they're navigating that? Because it could be an unintended consequence, right? As you develop more critical thinkers, especially at the younger age, then they're going to push back in those K through 12 settings. And and then there's a power balance, right? A power dynamic that you also have to consider, that the teacher has the right to fail students, has the right to detain students in certain ways. And so how do we keep that mindful, right, of creating those different spaces. But now that we have the American Indian Academy of Denver, like now working with primarily middle school students, that's been a non-issue, right? Because they are almost all of the faculty there are native trained or have been kind of trained in understanding different pedagogical approaches to be more equitable and less oppressive in the school system. So I'm just hopeful in terms of for us to be able to have more educational systems where we have leaders who are willing to take those risks and put themselves out there so our students will have a more safe space like that.
I'm raising warriors, guys. I mean, thank you for that comment because I think I needed it. When I teach my class, I don't think about settler colonialism or any of those things, but I think I needed to hear that feedback.
I see Dree, you have a hand raised as well.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question about, well, like I'm in college right now, but I'm interested in going into education in the future, and then like an educator with like a nonprofit. But I was wondering if people had thoughts to share about trying to do like place-based science and nature education in like with like primarily non-native students, and as a non-native educator, like what the balance between like avoiding being appropriative and being respectful while also trying to just how to share these ideas without being like while being as respectful as possible. Just any thoughts people have.
So I'll go first, guys, but I'll go very quickly. But just there's a wonderful Chinook dude that lives up by the Columbia River, Tony Johnson. He's like the chief now for their tribe. But when I was a kid, he was a kid too. We're the same age. But he would come down. He would tell us stories, right? Because they used to come down and steal women from Coos Bay. So him and his wife would come down and play like they were going to take someone. So what he told us, because we don't have very much culture left in Coos Bay, right? Because the only women that got to stay are who our tribe is today. Everyone else got marched up the coast and killed at the reservations, right? The women married with the Swedish and the Finnish fishermen. But he said, even if you have one cedar tree and you love it, right? You really love that tree, then you're going to learn, right? You're going to reclaim it piece by piece. It's going to take centuries, right? But it's not bad work. And so I would say the same thing, right? Just like teach people to love it, dude, to love being outside. Like, because that's what's missing, right? All this forest management, they don't love it, dude. They don't love those forests. So I think that's the key to me, at least.
I think that there's a lot in thinking about like land stewardship and being in relation are important fundamental values for like all humans. And so like lately I've been thinking a lot and reflecting on about, because so much dehumanization, like Native people and many other communities have been dehumanized so systemically with settler colonialism that we've had to work so hard to regain ourselves as humans. But that idea of, and I think we should be centering ourselves. We need to center ourselves. That's the work we need to be doing. And it's a little bit different from those who are non-Indigenous or, And so, but I think that those, it's important to share the knowledge systems as they are knowledge systems and philosophies that should be shared. And it opens up, the awareness of those, that they are on par, and it is another way of thinking. That idea of like how to balance and prevent appropriating is one I think a lot of people are trying to balance. I think kind of reiterating that idea of knowing this information doesn't make you Indigenous. It just makes you know the information, and like centering that is important. But again, like I said, it is information and philosophies and beliefs that people need to have access to, but knowing it doesn't mean that they're Indigenous or Native. That's kind of how I think of it. Yeah.
I know for ourselves, like one of the things that we have done is really in consultation with many different people from many different communities. So not having many different elders involved in the communication, having different, and then in particular, having our non-Native educators that come into our space understand clearly that Indigenous knowledge is prioritized. That is the one thing that we will always do, is that we will always center it. We'll begin with it. It'll be at the middle, it'll be at the end. And again, we're not here to indoctrinate them with these colonial ideas of what math and science means, but actually giving them a new chapter, a new book to be able to see those understandings in a different way. The way that I think one of our most like recent experiences, but it was a couple summers ago, that really epitomized that was we had an elder who came who was able to, had to process some eagles because he's one of our eagle feather carriers, and he invited our students into that space of how to caretake for the eagle feathers and the bodies. And so last minute, we pulled together a whole bunch of students and just families, and then we all went out to Talbot. We were able to camp out there with the families. And it was just amazing to be able to see the students actually see the eagles in front of them, be able to touch them, be able to see the songs and the prayers and the process that need to go into the caretaking of it. But then to be able to have Sophia's partner, who focuses a lot on engineering, be able to hold up the eagle and show how an eagle flies and what the feathers do and the purposes behind that, talking about force and direction and lift and all these things. It was just really fascinating to be able to see the students then make that connection, right? These ideas around these very like technical words, but being able to put a sense to it. So every time, like my son participates, and every time he sees an eagle now or any type of bird, hawk, he's always like looking at it and trying to study it and try to understand like how it glides, how it keeps itself so high in the air. And so for me, that was really meaningful to be able to show our kids like how they can learn about science and also have an appreciation for the world around them as well too.
Thank you.
Pua?
I just have a quick question. How has COVID helped or hurt you guys during this time? I mean, has it given you a push to do the work that you're doing? Or, and I have an elder that a Hawaiian elder who calls this COVID the messenger. So I'm just curious about what your thoughts are about that.
I'll say two things to that. One, I would say our progress in digital objects has definitely kind of been halted, but we've been making connections in different ways. So at the beginning of the pandemic, whenever we kind of had a little bit more momentum going, we would actually get families together. So myself, Sophia, and a few other families would get together and we would do science experiments over Zoom. And the kids would just love it. Like it'd just be something really simple, like blowing bubbles or throwing hot or boiling air into freezing air, or sorry, boiling water into freezing air and seeing how it kind of crystallizes immediately. So, so for us, like we've been able to kind of keep those connections. But in terms of being able to deliver on a broader basis, that's been definitely more of a challenge. But we have been able to continue the relationships that we've had with the Indian Ed programs. So right now what we have is bi-weekly meetings where we pull together many different educators and families and just kind of give updates and around like what's happening in the communities, where there's like opportunities to share learning experiences. So we have this community calendar that's across the greater Denver area where people are putting on these different activities. And so people can go to this calendar and be like, oh, there's something going on this week. And if they want to get their kids involved, for the most part, it's free to anyone. And that's actually where the American Indian Academy has been able to kind of be that in-between person to be able to offer, like say, for instance, my son is not in one of the school districts that has an Indian Ed program, but because we're part of the community with them, the American Indian Academy has been able to kind of supplement like any services like to him. And so in that sense, we've been able to strengthen those relationships. The last part for me, what I, as a parent, that I see being very challenging, right? Of also working and, being a parent, trying to make sure my child is making progress. It's also made me realize that this is the first time that any generation of Native people have been able to have their kids at home for these long extended periods of time, and to be able to really actively see what our children are learning and to be able to put the pause button on and be like, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to do this instead. Or to be able to reframe like what is progress in terms of like, oh, there's this checklist that you have to get done. But if your child is sitting in front of the screen for 4 hours straight, it's like, how has that helped their well-being? And to be able to have that ownership and just tell the teachers, like, you know what, he's not going to be able to do this assignment because of these reasons. It gives me a sense of empowerment to kind of get through some of those rough days of how do I balance work, how do I balance teaching and, just my own well-being. So to me, I think it's like being able to reframe it like that, where we can be that, like you said, that messenger, right, to help our students.
And Pua, I hope your family, when they said that it's the messenger, meant it's the messenger of a big change. I'm hoping.
I'm praying for it. I hope so too.
Me too.
Well,
Okay, well, thank
thank
you.
you.
I don't know if any of you have some kind of closing thoughts to share. I think that panel was awesome. It was, I think, making everyone panelists was a really good idea. Yeah, do you have any kind of closing things to say?
Thank you for joining us. And the Padlet is up there. Feel free to add to it. And if I have an email. You're welcome to email me if you want to talk anymore or have questions. You can email the Carrie or something. But
Okay, I
thank you.
put my email in the chat window as well, but we're supposed to go to another meeting now, so.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. I'm really grateful for you guys coming here and having activities and sharing with us.
It was wonderful to meet you all.
Thank you so much.
So before we leave, if any of you are enrolled in the certificate program, this is a reminder to fill in your evaluations for today to get your certificates. We have about 5-6 minutes until the closing. So for that, we're all gonna head back to the other Zoom link. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, the original Zoom link, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure is where we're going now.
Yes.
Earlier in the day.
And I'll find that really quick and put it in the chat if you want to come for the closing and hear the closing remarks. But yeah, otherwise, thank you for this great panel. And I must say, like, as a young woman and as a grad student, seeing you all succeed in this is really inspiring. So thank you for everything that you do.
Yeah, thank
And I'll
you.
find that other Zoom link.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.